He said the numbers like a prayer he didn't believe in. 6, 17, 19, 45, 12, 23. The numbers tacked behind the plexiglass were written in fat black marker on a strip of receipt paper taped under a faded smile. "You're on camera" sticker. Speckles of spit hung on the sneeze guard where the man's breath had struck it. The mega chug sweating in his fist was still unopened. He had the look, last minute. $5 in his palm and a pocket full of impatience. The night clerk stared, then blinked. He was supposed to say, "Cash first." He was supposed to remind the guy it was 3 minutes to closing and the county had rules. Instead, Calvin Mercer's right hand drifted under the counter and trembled there, fingers brushing a cold steel curve. "What are the odds?" the man said, voice rasped raw by cigarettes. 20 on pump 2 and a quick pick with those. Calvin swallowed. He could feel the buzz of the fluorescent light above as if it were trapped under his skin. He reached up and tugged the microphone on his ball cap like it was real. "Your gun's not cocked," Calvin said, the drawl gone from his voice as if he'd absently set it down somewhere. The man frowned, then followed Calvin's nod and, after a clumsy second, pulled the hammer back with a click that punched the silence. They stared at each other through smudges and spit. "This is self-defense?" the man asked. "If I told you," Calvin said, easing the register open and palming a 5. "You wouldn't believe me." "Hell, I don't believe me." The man's mouth eased. What kind of clerk admitted that? He lowered his pistol a hair, backing away from the windowed booth. And that was all it took. Calvin stepped out from behind the counter, knocking a rack of potato chips into a salty waterfall that hissed on the dirty tile. "Forget it, man," the would-be robber muttered. "Keep the cash." I can't let you go," Calvin said. "There's a particular sound a car makes when there are no other cars around. It's not the engine. It's the air making room for you." The lot was empty. The highway beyond it a black artery. The open sign sang fluorescent blue. Calvin waved the gun, and the man nodded at his own rust-speckled sedan parked at pump 2. His hands shook when he tossed Calvin the keys. He surrendered his own gun like it had burned him and shuffled to the passenger side when told. The interior smelled like old fries and old sweat and something sickly sweet. Calvin appeared at the door with a coil of metal twine. The kind you only find when you've gone looking for something else. "Lean forward," he said. "Why?" "Because if you don't, I'll kill you before we even start." The man leaned. The wire bit. Calvin tied him in a harness a tow truck would have envied, then stuffed the gun in his waistband and walked around to the driver's side. The 5 he'd stolen from the till, already damp from his hand, was in his pocket like a promise. "If you're going to kill me," the man said as the engine rumbled awake, "just do it. Don't talk me to death." Calvin stared through the windshield. Out back, the car wash sat like a mouth with a chain across its lips. The sign hanging from the chain said, "Out of service." Water stains had turned its white plastic the color of weak tea. "What are the odds you'd pick those exact numbers?" Calvin said, and the man laughed once. One sick bark. "Buddy, odds. I thought you said you weren't a mathematician." "It doesn't matter," Calvin said. He drove around the store and eased the car up onto the metal rails that would have dragged it forward on a good day. Tonight, there would be no foam-brushed shine or spotless rinse. Calvin got out. He unhooked the chain, letting it clatter to the concrete, and crossed to the payment kiosk. The keypad was greasy. He fed the machine the 5 like he was feeding a stray dog that might bite him for the courtesy. The ground hummed. At first the man tried to scream, but swallowed it down. He watched in a daze as the scrubbers spun and flexed, not quite reaching. Not quite machine, and the hoses began to weep a syrup that smoked in the night air. "Thank God it doesn't hunger often," Calvin said, almost apologetic. And then the first ribbon of liquid hit the windshield. and the glass went to pebbles with a sound like rain on tin. The roof sizzled and dimpled. The brush heads extended, found the wire harness, and hugged the man like a mother who meant to drown her child. Calvin went back inside and turned up the station's music loud enough to drown a human voice. No one stopped. No one asked. An empty county road keeps its secrets when it wants to. When it was over, he hosed the concrete and then mopped with bleach until the air burned his lungs. The runoff slid to the drains, and there was no hair, no bone, no proof of anything except a patch of stubborn soap scum that he worked at with a scrub brush until it finally smeared down to the grate. Then he walked inside, pulled the marker from under the counter, stood on a milk crate, and put a curved line through the 23 on the paper behind the plexiglass. He wrote 28 where the gap was. He capped the marker and stood there with his arms still raised, chest heaving. A little after 3, a new customer shuffled in, a tired, husky guy with a runny nose and the blue-collar slump of someone who had learned not to expect much of anything from after midnight. Trent Malloy bought a ticket and cracked a joke about never being lucky. Calvin yawned, told him best of luck like he always did, and slid him the key on its chain when the man asked for the bathroom. The key came with the station's strangest trophy, an Ohio license plate bent and rust-freckled. The letters barely readable unless you turned your neck just so. "We heavy fun." Trent washed his hands twice just to avoid touching anything and came out holding the plate like it might talk. He set it on the counter. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "Ohio," Calvin said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Trent didn't smile back. "My neighbor had this plate. I saw it every day. Brian Leonard. 2 weeks ago. He disappeared." Calvin didn't move, didn't blink. "Was a real piece of work," Trent said, almost as if defending himself for remembering. He screamed at his girl. "I saw her with a black eye once." He stole bikes out of garages. "Still, people don't just vanish." "Sometimes," Calvin said. "They do." "What do you mean?" "They do." He didn't answer. He waved Trent around the counter and out the door, as if the answer were waiting like a customer. Night air poured in, and a chipmunk darted across the lot and straight through the gap where the chain hung low. Calvin fed the machine a 5 without ceremony. The wash woke. There was a squeal, a crunch too small to mourn, and then silence again. Trent stood there, mouth open in that way that never quite closes afterward. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know," Calvin said. "They told me even if I did, I couldn't say." "They?" "Men in black and sunglasses. Not a joke. They pay me to watch it, and to keep people quiet about it." Trent couldn't stop looking at the mouth of the wash. He scratched his jaw. He spoke to the dark more than to Calvin. "Ever think about choosing who goes in?" "No," Calvin said, which was true and also a lie. "I won't play God." "It's not God," Trent said. "It's garbage collection." 2 nights later, and 5 miles down the road, in a rougher station where the clerk was a kid with a work permit and the cooler doors didn't close all the way, a jittery man stuffed a bag of chips, a sleeve of jerky, a bottle of beer, and a pack of gum onto the counter and asked the cashier if he'd ever seen The Price is Right. When the kid didn't laugh, the man took the scanner and made a game of it. The total came to $7.99, just like the kid had said, and the man grinned and pulled a pistol and said, "You forgot tax." The shots sounded like late fireworks. The door chime beeped after. The killer trotted into the rain-freckled night and opened his car, took a warm swig of beer, and slid the key into the ignition. An arm slipped from the back seat and looped around his neck. A rag pressed to his face that smelled like a hospital and a crime. He struggled, then went limp. Before midnight, the chime at Calvin's store sang again. Calvin looked up, already annoyed. and saw Trent drag a full-grown man duct-taped into a gray cocoon up the aisle, where he dropped him in a wet thud. The tape muffled the man screaming. Fabuloso still shined on the floor where he landed. "What the hell are you doing?" Calvin barked. "We talked," Trent said. He was breathing hard, sweating in two different ways. "You were right about Luck. But Luck's sloppy. I found this one doing a murder. That's not Luck. That's a lead." Calvin started to say no. The door chimed again. Two men in black suits stepped in like the air parted for them. Their guns were already out. Oddly polite, like they were apologizing in advance. One had cheekbones you could cut wire on. The other's suit was pressed so crisp it made noises when he moved. "Mr. Mercer," said the first, whose name would later be given as Agent Hollis. The second agent Keene watched Trent with the calm boredom of a mechanic waiting for a diagnosis to be printed. Tape Man writhed on the floor, and the sound of him was obscenely alive. Guns came up. The geometry of fear filled the room. "Outside," Agent Keene said. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to explain anything to anyone. They walked like a parade to the back. The chain sagged across the car wash opening. The plastic sign said, "Out of service," with a sunny smile you only saw when you'd given up. "Look," Calvin said. "The guy saw a chipmunk go in. That's all he knows." He pointed at Trent. Trent, to his credit or his damnation, nodded like a man still trying to prove he belonged in a conversation where he didn't. "Shoot me. Then," Calvin said suddenly, as if his mouth had got the jump on his brain. "I'm not feeding it another soul for your paperwork." Agent Hollis's gun coughed, and a hole opened in Calvin's face. The body went down like a sack of cement. All at once, Trent made a sound, a breathless moan that never found a word. "What's it going to be?" Agent Keene asked Trent, and Trent's eyes ping-ponged between the black door and the black gun and the black sky. He nodded once, small and pathetic. The gun coughed again. Trent dropped beside Calvin. The gun stayed level as if they hadn't done anything worth reacting to. Agent Hollis ripped the tape from the killer's mouth and asked, almost conversational, "Bullet or wash?" The man laughed. "This is a joke, right?" "It is not," Agent Keene said. "Wash," the man said, grinning, and walked 2 steps into the dark throat before Agent Hollis fed the machine its meal, and the world went to foam and screaming and then to nothing. Agent Keene touched a finger to the coil of his ear. Targets neutralized and subject nourished. He didn't get the rest out. 2 shots cracked, and his head jerked back, sunglasses flipping off and skittering into a puddle. Agent Hollis fell on top of him with the second shot, their limbs in a tangle, suits in the filth. The dumpy fellow from earlier, the one who'd asked for $10 on pump 1 and left when he was told, toe stepped out from the shadow of the ice machine with a pistol he hadn't shown to anyone before. His name was Roger Blaine, and he moved with an odd mix of plodding gentleness and trained economy. He reached down and pressed 2 fingers to Agent Keene's throat as if checking whether the man could hear condolences. Then he put a finger to his own ear. "Both targets neutralized," he said. "Scene's hot. You're not going to believe this. Remember the guy who slipped out of Bronson County last month? The one with the tattoo of the price is right well on his calf, like some kind of joke? He's Hamburger." The voice in his ear sounded like an old coffee mug looks. "You alone?" "Now I am," Roger said. "Copy. Hold position. Package the site. Do not feed the subject again." Roger crouched and picked up the fallen sunglasses, turning them once in his hand. Greasy fingerprints blurred his reflection. He slid them into his pocket like a souvenir he intended to throw away later. "So," he said aloud to the mouth in the concrete, "here we are?" He found a box of contractor-grade trash bags in the supply closet and started with what could be carried. He rolled Calvin in 2 layers, pulled him with a mop handle under the knees, and heaved him into the bed of a county pickup he knew where to find keys for. He did the same for Trent. The men in suits took more time. He moved as if he had broken a vow once and learned to live with the ache of it. He finished before the first pink ghost of dawn rose behind the cornfields. He took the white plastic, out-of-service sign in his hands and looked at it until the words were just shapes. Then he rehung it and pulled the chain taut and locked it where anyone could see. Inside, he scrubbed like a man who understood the theology of cleaning. Fabuloso. Bleach. The stiff brush with the green handle. The scum fought back, smeared into a map of its own making before surrendering to the drain. He stood, put the marker back to the paper behind the glass, and hesitated. 28. He put a second curve through it. 28 became 28 crossed out. A private epitaph. When the sun had climbed out of bed and the birds began their business. 2 panel trucks rolled in. Men wore coveralls with a logo no one in town had ever noticed before, though it had always been there. They moved with the speed of people who had learned that speed was a kind of mercy. They erected tarps and poured fuming chemicals through hoses into the wash, filling the belly with a caustic tide until heat shimmered in the air above it. They shut the store's water off at the street and hung a city utility tag on the valve that said work order pending. By noon, a drum truck arrived. It backed up to the wash mouth and unspooled concrete into the dark like they were sealing a cave where an animal slept badly. The men smoothed the gray with long aluminum screeds and the surface shined under the August sun. A city inspector signed a form he didn't read. An excavator rattled in on a lowboy and tore the building down from the back forward, the roof folding like a suitcase. The bricks fell into the wash, into the new concrete, into the mouth that no longer had a name. By nightfall, there was a rectangular scar where a car wash had been. The convenience store counter stood in the open air like a stage prop. Boxes of candy glinted dully in the dying light. Roger stood at the edge of the slab and listened. The concrete spoke of heat and settling, the way a body talks to itself as it heals. "You're done," he said to the slab. He had watched men talk to graves, and he had never laughed. Back at the county yard, he lifted the bags alone. A refrigerated truck hummed. He swung the latch, counted each load, then shut the latch and stood with his hands in his pockets in that way peaceful men have when they're trying to become something else. He turned in the car from pump to the one whose owner had picked the wrong night for faith in Numberstow, a pond used by the Department of Agriculture for spraying rigs. He watched it sink and thought of the Ohio plate, of letters that almost made a joke even when you knew the punchline wasn't funny. At headquarters, a sturdy brick building that had once been a bank until the savings ran out, Roger sat at a steel table with a chipped corner and wrote a report that used words like incident, neutralization, and mitigation. He didn't write the names: Calvin Mercer, Trent Malloy, Brian Leonard, Agent Hollis, Agent Keene. He wrote ID numbers and times. He left a space where the word hunger should have gone and put mechanism instead. The voice that belonged to the coffee mug asked how he felt about the day's work. He said tired, because that was true and safe. The voice told him the site would be turned into a parking lot until the county found a developer happy to pave over the memory. It told him the subject might not be singular, that similar events had been observed in other districts, that policy would be reviewed in light of today's outcome. What about the idea of using it? Roger asked, and surprised himself with the interest in his own voice. As a removal asset. Policy is conservation. The voice said, that is the policy until it is not. We do not wash the world. We keep the pipes from bursting and we go home. Roger signed off and took the elevator down. He was a middle-aged man with bad knees and a soft middle who had never gotten used to calling the things he did by their correct names. He drove back to the station out of habit. People returned to the scene, not because they're guilty, but because they've left something behind. The lot was roped off with fresh caution tape. A county deputy idled at the curb with his hat pushed back on his head. Roger waved. The deputy lifted a hand and didn't ask a thing. 8 months later, a coffee shop stood on that slab. The kind where the espresso machine hisses like a cat and the chalkboard menu changes with the seasons. Long-haul drivers parked along the shoulder and stretched their legs before ordering black coffee and thawed scones that tasted better than their labels. A mural on the side of the building showed a smiling river full of fish and children on bicycles. A town that believed itself. The only thing left of the old store was a singular rectangle of lighter concrete near the back door where deliveries came. No one noticed it, but people who had a reason to measure. Roger went in once. He paid cash. He ordered something with cinnamon he didn't know how to pronounce and waited patiently while teenagers in aprons moved with the elegant panic of understaffed grace. He sat near the back and listened to conversations about soccer practice, about rent going up, about a math teacher who gave too much homework. He watched a little boy press his fingers to the glass case of pastries with the solemn respect children give things they are not allowed to touch. He left $1 in the cup and held the door for an old woman coming in. Before he went home, he parked on the shoulder of the county road the way men park when they know how long they intend to sit. He cracked the window. A tractor hummed in a field. The sky tilted toward violet. He touched the Ohio plate on his passenger seat, found it in the janitor's closet where Calvin had stashed it, and kept it against his better judgment, because people keep relics they claim not to believe in. The paint had gone to gray. The letters were barely there if you didn't know what you were squinting at. He took a black marker from the glove box and drew a neat curve through the 28 in the corner of the receipt paper he had brought with the plate. He put the page back in the envelope and slid the envelope into his jacket pocket. He thought about writing a letter to Calvin's sister, a woman he'd found on a social page that was half birthday cakes and half prayers. He thought about telling her that Calvin died in an accident at work and that the company would be in touch. He thought about driving to Trent Malloy's rental and sticking a plain white envelope with cash in the mail slot. Good money badly earned for a funeral with no body. A kindness so late it had to be anonymous. He didn't do any of those things. He drove to the river instead and threw the plate. Underhand, like he was skipping a rock. It slapped once, twice, and then went under. The ripples moved toward the reeds, and the water swallowed the circle without a hiccup. There are endings that hurt because they are the ends you asked for. There are endings that feel like the first clean sip of a morning when the world decides to give you a pass. And there are endings where nothing changes at all but the heat in the ground, the thickness of the concrete, the depth of the scar. If the world had needed another wash, it would have said so. Roger drove home. He slept. He woke with a knot in his shoulder and a routine in his hands. He went back to work the next day and filled out a requisition for more bleach. And when the form asked for purpose, he wrote, cleaning. When he reached the box that asked if hazardous materials would be involved, he checked yes and drew a second neat curve through the word no. He did not feed the subject again. He did not say the word hunger out loud. He did not take souvenirs anymore. He kept one thing, a small, stubborn patch of soap scum on the sole that he scrubbed with whatever faith he had left. Months passed. The coffee shop prospered. A new sign went up on the highway promising fresh pastries and gas 2 exits ahead. The county fair came and went with rides that squealed and teenagers who kissed behind tents that smelled like onions and grease. The world did not end. It rarely does when a single man chooses not to be an expert in how it ends. If you stood in the back lot at night and held your breath, you could hear something under the concrete, the common conversations of heat and time. You could hold your palm flat on the slab and pull it away without feeling a thing. You could stand under the mural and take a picture that would get likes. You could look at the sky and tell yourself a story about a country that cleans what it should and leaves alone what it must. Roger went to church exactly once in that same span. He stood and sat when the congregation did and sang the song he half remembered from a grandmother's kitchen. He put a 5 in the plate because it was the smallest bill he had, and the ritual mattered to him even when it did not agree with him. The sermon was about the things we throw away. The preacher said, "If you want to know what a town loves, watch what it saves. If you want to know what it fears, watch what it buries." After, Roger shook hands with a woman who smelled like peppermint and wore a brooch of a sparrow on a branch. She said she prayed for the county workers. He accepted the gift he hadn't asked for and walked out into the humid morning a little lighter and no less responsible. He never went back to the slab at night again. Habit is a soft chain. He switched shifts and took 2 weeks off and sat on his porch and watched game shows with the sound down and the captions up. And when the cliff-climbing yodeler came on The Price is Right, he clicked the television off with the same tenderness other men reserve for putting a baby down, for laying a hand on a casket, for closing a door without locking it. Years later, when the coffee shop expanded and the back room became a music space where a man with a steel guitar called out for requests, Roger sat in the corner and clapped at the right times and left before the tip bucket came around. He walked out into a parking lot that did not remember what had been under its paint. He drove home in a car that did not care where the river began or whether it ever ended. He turned left where he used to turn right. He slept without dreaming. A secretary at the brick building filed his report under a code that meant it would be forgotten correctly. The voice the color of a coffee mug retired and took up woodworking, which is the art of making shapes behave. The department stopped saying subject and started saying event. The men who prefer new words to old ones felt useful, and the slab stayed quiet. If you stand there now, you can smell cinnamon. You can watch a barista write your name on a cup in a hand that will be a mother's one day or a surgeon's, a hand that has never held a gun. You can listen to a boy ask his father why soap scum sticks even when you scrub it. And you can hear the father, trying for authority and landing instead on honesty, say, because some things stay a while. You can decide what stays. You can walk around the corner and see where someone has spray painted a number on a utility box and another hand has drawn a curve through it. You can nod or shake your head. You can tell yourself a story. You can ask the person next to you what theirs is and whether the ending felt right when they got there. And when you go home, you can wash your hands until the skin is pink and clean and the lines of your palms are yours again, the way you tell yourself they always were. If this story pulled you in, I would love to hear your thoughts. Should vigilantes ever be allowed to decide who deserves to disappear? Is state violence justified when it's hidden under the language of policy and public safety? Where do you draw your own line between justice and convenience? Share your stance in the comments and tell me what you believe a community should wash away, and what it ought to no matter how hard it is to scrub. Your perspective matters, and your debate helps shape the next story.